This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Lokwe. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Supporters of South Korea's impeached president cheering the cancellation of his arrest warrant. But Yoon Yeol still behind bars pending appeal from the prosecution. China's foreign minister using his media conference at the yearly parliamentary sessions to reinforce Beijing's assertion that it is a reliable global power that plays by the rules. South Korea's Air Force grounding nearly all its planes after the accidental bombing of civilian areas yesterday, leaving dozens injured. Japan's finally declaring a win in its decades-long battle with deflation. Tokyo says all four key indicators used to assess falling prices have turned positive. Also in East Asia tonight, Japan and Britain hold high-level trade and security talks as they brace for sweeping tariffs that are unlikely to spare key U.S. allies. Plus,
whoa, oh my gosh.
Safari debris streaking through the sky over the Bahamas after SpaceX's Starship spacecraft exploded minutes after liftoff in Texas. A court in Seoul has cancelled the arrest warrant for South Korea's impeached president, following an appeal from his legal team. This could pave the way for the release of Yoon Yeol. He has been detained since the middle of January, charged with insurrection over declaring martial law in December. Supporters of President Yoon gathered outside the detention center where he is being held just south of Seoul. Mr. Yoon's lawyers have called for his release, but they do concede this may not happen just yet, as prosecutors can appeal the court's dismissal of his arrest warrant. We're joined by our senior correspondent Lim Yoon-sok in Busan, South Korea. Yoon-sok, what are the chances of today's court decision affecting Mr. Yoon's criminal and impeachment trials?
Well, experts here are saying that it could perhaps have an impact on President Yoon's criminal trial, but it's unlikely to affect his impeachment trial. Now, right now, there are two separate cases happening here in South Korea with the impeachment trial at the Constitutional Court. All arguments have been made by the parliament side, which impeached President Yoon, and also by the lawyers representing him. Now, South Korea is now just really waiting for the Constitutional Court to decide whether he should be impeached and removed from the presidential office or whether he should be reinstated back into the presidential office. Now, many experts here are saying that the Constitutional Court ruling could be out as early as next week. Now, with the criminal court case, it hasn't really even begun here. The first pretrial proceedings have taken place, and then there's another pretrial scheduled for later this month. Some experts saying that the ruling on Friday by the Seoul Central District Court could work in favor of President Yoon at the criminal court. And that's because, first of all, it is the same Seoul Central District Court that is handling President Yoon's criminal case. And also because of the reasons why the Seoul Central District Court ruled to cancel President Yoon's detention. Now, the Seoul court questioned whether the insurrection charges indictment was legally filed or not, because it was done after the defendant's detention period had expired, and also whether this whole process of his detention was legally enforced or not, as this case was first handled by the Anti-Corruption Agency, which has no legal authority to indict a sitting president, though the agency had transferred the case to prosecutors after failing to detain him, in its first arrest attempt. Now, the court said that the question of jurisdiction was also unclear, as this was unprecedented here, and that any further unresolved legal controversies during the criminal trial court could serve as grounds for annulment in a higher court, and may also provide grounds for a retrial even after a significant amount of time has passed. And so it's because of those reasons that many experts here are saying that Friday's ruling could work in favor of President Yoon Suk-yeol in the criminal court.
Yoon Suk, as those legal wheels are turning, there is reaction on the ground. Before we crossed you, we saw footage of his supporters cheering this decision by that court in South Korea. But of course, in these weeks that we have been speaking to you, there have been people for President Yoon and people against President Yoon. What's the mood like in terms of reacting to this latest court decision?
Well, it's really the same here. Nothing has really changed here in South Korea. We, as expected, the ruling party welcomed this, saying that President Yoon should be released immediately. And also his lawyers put out a statement saying that now they believe that this rule of law was alive here in South Korea and that he should be immediately released from detention. Meanwhile, the main opposition party held a meeting right after that ruling came out, saying that it was hard to believe what the court had decided to do and that President Yoon Suk-yeol should remain behind bars, and said that the prosecutor should appeal this immediately so that he does remain behind bars, and the prosecutors have 7 days to decide whether or not they will appeal this or not. If the prosecutors decide to waive this, then President Yoon Suk-yeol could be released immediately. Meanwhile, in South Korea, among South Koreans, reaction is also mixed. Right now, I am here in Busan, which has been a traditionally conservative city, and this is what some of the residents told me earlier.
그런다고 국회의원을 구속시킨 것도 아니고 애꿎은 시민들을 갖다가 또 이렇게 잡아서 이어가지고 언론을 탄압한다든지 이런 것도 아니기 때문에 그거는 취소하는 게 안 맞나 이런 생각이 들었어요.
구치소에 이제 계시는 게 아무래도 한 나라의 대통령이니까 좀 그래서 저는 탄핵까지는 잘 모르겠는데 그래도 구치소에 계시는 게 취소돼서 다행이라고 생각합니다.
Now, these were residents of Busan where, there's still a lot of support for President Yoon and his ruling party. Now, meanwhile, we are expecting rallies against and in support of President Yoon's impeachment in the capital, Seoul, but also here in Busan on Saturday.
Well, thanks for that. CNA's Lim Yoon Suk there live from Busan, South Korea, after this decision by the court to dismiss the arrest warrant for the impeached president of South Korea. Turning to China, top diplomat Wang Yi says the country seeks to be a source of stability amid an international situation he described as full of challenges. While speaking at a packed media conference on the sidelines of the ongoing annual political meetings in Beijing, Foreign Minister Wang Yi fielded a wide range of questions. He said China would continue to play a constructive role in resolving the Ukraine crisis, while also hitting out at two-faced acts by the United States. Amid a renewed row over trade, Mr. Wang adding that China would take countermeasures in response to arbitrary pressure. This comes as the Trump administration hiked tariffs on Chinese imports this week, accusing China of flooding the U.S. with the deadly opioid fentanyl. Mr. Wang hit back, saying this was America's domestic issue.
任何一个国家都不能幻想一边对华打压遏制，一边又与中国发展良好关系。这种两面人的做法，不仅不利于双边关系的稳定，也无法建立起彼此的互信。美国不应以怨报德，更不能无端加税，这不是负责任的大国所为。
And from we're joined by our Beijing correspondent, Olivia Xiong. Olivia, you were at the news conference. How else did concerns about implicitly the United States shape Mr. Wang's response to other issues?
Wei Su, in the over 20 questions that the foreign minister answered in this hour-and-a-half-long session, there were many veiled and direct references to the U.S., but specifically when it came to the Ukraine war, Mr. Wang was asked what role China would play, given how Mr. Trump has said that hopefully China would be able to help the U.S. stop the Ukraine war. Now, there was no direct answer from Mr. Wang, but he did say China wanted to achieve a fair, lasting and binding peace agreement and that it will continue to play a constructive role in this together with the international community. But Mr. Wang did not answer directly the question on what conditions there needed to be for China to consider sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine, nor was there any mention of Europe being at the negotiating table. But interestingly as well, Mr. Wang said that China welcomes and supports all efforts for peace. And in a separate question, he also also lauded China's relationship with Russia and when asked whether bilateral ties may be affected given the shift in Washington's position under the new Trump administration, given how now the U.S. is dealing directly with Russia. This is what Mr. Wang had to say.
中国双方已经探索出一条不结盟、不对抗、不针对第三方的相处之道。我们站在的新型大国关系的前列，也树立了相邻国家关系的典范。一个成熟、坚韧、稳定的中俄关系，不会受一时一事而变，更不会受第三方的干扰，是动荡世界中的衡量，而不是地缘博弈中的变量。
Olivia, Mr. Wang there referring to any third party, not actually naming the United States. In fact, he did not directly do that or even name the new U.S. president. So we need to interpret all these comments from Mr. Wang Yi. I understand you have a guest there with you to help us with this very difficult task.
That's right, Wei Su. It is a difficult task, and that's why I'm glad I'm joined by Dr. Wang Yeol, who is founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization think tank, and he was also a former state council counselor. Dr. Wang, first, would like to get your reaction to the foreign minister's comments and response on Ukraine. The language seems to be consistent with China's position in the past, but the dynamics now have shifted. So in what ways do you think China is looking to play a role, if even at all, in the ongoing Ukraine war?
Well, I think there's a great shift now on the dynamic of the war. You see that the U.S. has been talking for some time, and of course Ukraine, the EU wants to get back. But I think eventually you need more guarantors for this war, and so U.S. is making proposal that they're going to send troops there. They're probably only going to do some mining agreement there, but further, they only want European troops and the non-European troops. So this is interesting. Non-European troops could be India, China, Turkey, or any other countries. I think that probably we need to come back to the UN peacekeeping force, because I don't think Putin would like to have NATO troops of Europe stationed at the border again for after 3 years of this hard fight. So it's probably interesting to see when the peace summit to be called. Were to be held, Saudi Arabia or Switzerland or Beijing, I mean, we'd love to see how that's going to coming out. I think Russians' opinion is also important to really see how to make this final peace deal, because we only see the U.S. proposal. We haven't seen any Russia proposal yet.
And what the Ukraine thinks as well on this. Do you think that that would be an arrangement that Ukraine would be able to accept? And with China's, with foreign minister's language, do you think he's keeping it specifically a bit vague to leave room for negotiation?
I think certainly China's stand is consistent. They always want to promote peace and dialogue. And I'm glad to see what President Zelensky's tune has changed quite a lot. They love to engage China. They welcome China. China Foreign Minister Wang Yi met Ukrainian Foreign Minister at Munich, where I was also attending, and that he said that China is Ukraine's largest trading partner. So I think China certainly has more clout to play even after the post-war of reconstruct Ukraine. So I think if China get involved to be a guarantor or some peacekeeping role, certainly that would be really more balanced rather than just have another Minsk agreement. So we need a more international. Let's have a BRICS countries be more actively engaged to safeguard peace for this part of the world.
That's an interesting proposal, and we'll definitely have to look out for how things develop, given there are many moving parts right now. But I just want to also bring in another soundbite from the foreign minister. There was this veiled swipe as he talked about the U.S. kind of retreating from the world stage and from international organizations. Let's have a listen first.
大国应当承担国际义务，履行好大国担当，不能唯利是图，更不能恃强凌弱。西方有句话，没有永远的朋友，只有永远的利益。而在中国看来，朋友 应当是永远的，利益应当是共同的。
Dr. Wang, from what we heard there, do you think we should read this as China wanting to step into a more prominent role on the world stage?
Well, I think the world is really at the danger of multilateralism is facing these big threats now, and so if we see U.S. is getting out of WHO, getting out of the Paris Agreement, getting out of the Human Rights Council, and getting out of many other institutions, and U.S. aid is stopped, I think the world probably expecting China to be more active. I mean, China is already contributing over 20% of the UN budget now. I mean, the second largest donor after U.S. But if the U.S. is not active, so China's role, and of course, including EU, global South countries, BRICS countries, should all come in more actively to safeguard the multilateral system we've been enjoying for the last 80 years.
I guess the follow-up question then, is there interest for China to do this?
Well, I think, China certainly is already doing a lot of that. For example, Belt and Road is a good global public goods that China invested over $1 trillion for 3,000 projects. China is actively engaged with China, Africa Summit, China, Latin American Summit, China, ASEAN, China, Gulf and China, many regions, and Central Asia as well. So China is really pursue economic globalization rather than militarization, securitization, or send troops everywhere or cruise every water that around the world. So I think there's a lot of China is doing to really convincing that China is really providing a lot of public goods. Of course, China is still a developing country, but China is already doing its best and contributed over 30% global GDP growth, becoming the largest trading nation with around 40 countries. So China probably is doing its best now.
Dr. Wang, we have seen, and I have attended, the Foreign Minister Wang Yi's press conferences in previous years, and we were just talking about this. It did seem that Mr. Wang took a less fiery tone this time round. Mm-hmm. What do you think this signals? Is it trying to woo other countries, and what does it say about how it wants to present itself?
No, I think China probably is doing a much better now, actually. That reflects not domestic but international situation as well, even though China has this tariff hanging around on its head now. But China has already facing 25% tariff since Trump's first term. And China, actually, the trade between U.S. and China has gone up 20% since last administration, the first administration of Trump. So I think China also is improving relation now. Because of internationally with India, with Japan, with Korea, with many surrounding countries. We have ASEAN countries, many heads of them visiting China frequently, with Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia. So I think China is probably in a positive mood now to really promoting the global peace and prosperity. So China should be more optimistic, more in a positive tune now. Even with U.S., China still wants to have 3 principles of peaceful coexistence and mutual respect and a win-win situation.
With regard to the U.S. specifically, from what we have seen today, given the uncertainties with the new Trump administration, have you seen a difference in how China is handling its diplomatic relations with the U.S. this time around compared to the first administration?
I think China probably is ready. Of course, as I said, we already experienced first term of Trump. We know Trump is a businessman. He's the deal of art of the deal. He's the master of the art of the deal, and China is like to continue it. So, for example, during the first time, Trump raised a 25% tariff, but we engaged in dialogue and discussion, and we reached the phase 1 agreement. Now he added another 20%. Let's talk again. Let's talk about all those issues. And also, I think overall, China's response was quite reserved and mild. For example, Trump applied a 20% tariff on all categories of Chinese product, importing from China. But China has only applied 80 to 100 categories, not all categories. And so there's a lot of room to talk. And then we could come to phase 2, phase 3. So I think, if Trump wants to do business and less ideologically driven, I think there's more room to talk about. And we can, who else can be the best deal maker than the second largest economy of China for U.S.?
Well, we shall have to see how things play out. But thank you so much, Dr. Wang, for your time and those insights and helping us unpack all that we saw from today's Foreign Minister's press conference. In the weekend, we are expecting these political gathering in China to continue, and we're expecting to hear more from Chinese officials on issues relating to livelihoods before the sessions wrap up on Tuesday. And we'll have more in the days ahead. For now, back to you, Wei Su.
Oh, thanks for that, Olivia. CNA's Olivia Xiong there, and her guest, Henry Wang Yeol, founder of the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, Nintendo shares sink nearly 10% in Tokyo as investors worry that US tariffs may hit video games. Crypto prices under some pressure after Donald Trump's US Bitcoin reserve plan falls short of expectations. Welcome back to East Asia tonight. Roland Lim is here with all the business news. Roland, Japan ready to declare an end to long-term deflation.
Right, you are, Wei Su. The Japanese economic minister says the country has cleared the key threshold for the government to officially make the claim. Ryosei Akazawa says that recent data shows that Japan's output gap turned positive in the final quarter of last year for the first time in 6 quarters. This means actual output exceeded the economy's full capacity due to solid demand. Now, while inflation has remained above the central bank's 2% target for nearly 3 years now, the government has been cautious in declaring a complete end to deflation, which it defines as a prolonged period of economic stagnation where slow wage growth keeps consumption subdued. Experts say the remark today highlights the government's optimism over the economic outlook, which could affect the timing of the Bank of Japan's next interest rate hike. Let's take a look at how Japanese equity markets closed. Nikkei 225 down 2.17%. The broader Topix index 1.5% lower. The yen, though, rose to a 5-month high against the dollar earlier, now 147 against the dollar. Now, diving deeper into some listings in the equity markets, we've been tracking shares of 7NI Holdings after the company announced sweeping new management measures yesterday. Its stock ending 1.3% in the red after dropping as much as 3.5%, indicating that investors remain cautious about the company's ability to dramatically improve business on its own steam. Meanwhile, Nintendo shares tanking more than 9%. That's as investors abandon Japan's outperforming video game stocks. The US is the world's biggest market for game consoles, and experts say under President Trump's new levies, game consoles could become costlier due to heftier import costs. And that's as most are either manufactured in China or rely on suppliers in the country for parts. Gaming shares have been among the brightest spots in Japan's otherwise lackluster equity markets so far this year. Heading over to China, exports and imports lost momentum in the first 2 months of this year, with growth for both missing estimates by a wide margin. The Chinese customs data showed that outbound shipments increased just 2.3% on year in the combined figures for January and February. This is a significant drop from the 10.7% recorded in December and missing the 5.9% estimate in a Bloomberg poll. Imports unexpectedly contracted 8.4% on year over the same period, missing estimates for a 1% growth. Switching to the crypto markets, US President Trump signed an executive order yesterday to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now, this will be from Bitcoin owned by the federal government that was forfeited from criminal or civil proceedings. Now, he added that it will not cost US taxpayers any money and that the US will not sell any Bitcoin in this reserve. Instead, it'll be kept as a store of value. And that announcement still sparked selling in crypto, Bitcoin, and Ethereum, failing to bounce back. They are trading at 88,112 currently and 2,169. And that'll do it for business. Wei Su.
Oh, thanks for that, Roland. And still ahead on this bulletin. More analysis on the wide-ranging address by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the 2 sessions. We'll speak with our Taiwan correspondent in just a moment. Plus, trade and security talks between Japan and Britain amidst looming tariffs from President Donald Trump that are unlikely to spare either of these two key U.S. allies. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines. A legal victory for impeached South Korean President Yoon Yeol after a court avoided his arrest warrant following an appeal by his legal team. But he remains in custody pending a possible appeal by prosecutors. Protesters in South Korea demand a halt to military drills after 29 people were injured by bombs mistakenly dropped by fighter jets on a civilian area during an exercise in Pocheon. And China pledges to provide certainty in an uncertain world, with Foreign Minister Wang Yi highlighting Beijing's role in promoting global stability and supporting multilateralism. On the sidelines of China's annual parliamentary meeting, top diplomat Wang Yi also reaffirmed Beijing's position on Taiwan, repeating that any attempt to seek the island's independence is doomed to fail.
坚持一个中国，就应该反对任何形式的态度。实现祖国完全统一，是全体中华儿女的共同愿望，是大势所趋，大义所在。台独分裂只会玩火自焚，以台制华无异于螳臂挡车。中国终将统一，也必将统一。
More Victoria Jen joins us live from Taipei. Victoria, how have Mr. Wang's remarks been interpreted?
Well, basically, Wang Yi's remarks it was repeating what the long-standing China position, and that is that Taiwan is an inseparable part of China, and also that reunification with Taiwan is inevitable. Now, these rhetorics have been repeated and mentioned over and over again for years. So analysts are saying that it's clear that China is exercising restraint as far as cross-strait relations are concerned. And they said that's mainly because the Taiwan issue is not the priority as far as China is concerned right now. What China is focusing on is its domestic economy and also its complicated relations with the U.S. Now, with the ongoing trade war with the U.S. and also the tensions with Trump, China is eager to try to sort these issues out before it makes any decisive actions towards Taiwan. Now, but having said that, Taiwan remains a sensitive issue for cross-strait relations, and that if Taiwan pushes for a formal independence, it's bound to attract a strong response from China. But how exactly the cross-strait relations are going to evolve, it still hinges on whether how the U.S. and China relations plays out. And so for now, we're expecting that China is adopting a wait-and-see approach.
Victoria, as you say, Mr. Wang repeating, certainly rhetorically, a long-standing position that Beijing has taken on the status of Taiwan. So that's one interpretation. Even so, as you also say, this is a sensitive issue. So Taiwan will still react in some way. What has the reaction been like from Taiwan to these comments?
Yeah, so far, the official reactions from the Foreign Ministry and as well as the Mainland Affairs Office, they both issued a statement saying that Taiwan is an independent sovereignty and that Taiwan is not part of China. And the PRC, because PRC and the ROC are not subordinate to each other, for China to say those things, it's actually stifled Taiwan's sovereignty, and this is going to heighten cross-strait tensions, and it's not helping with the cross-strait relations. And basically, these are standard answers that the Taiwanese officials usually make when addressing the such remarks from China. So such exchanges did not really come as a surprise to most Taiwanese. But what the most Taiwanese are worried about is the attitude of the United States, especially after the fallout between Ukrainian President Zelensky and U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, this is raising concerns whether the U.S. is going to continue to support Taiwan, because the U.S. has clearly shifted its support from Ukraine now after withdrawing its military aid. So analysts are urging Taiwan should not put all the eggs in the U.S. basket, and it should actually create space and also opportunities for cross-strait dialogues.
Thanks for that. Victoria Jen there from Taipei, looking at both interpretations and reactions to Foreign Minister Wang Yi's comments on the status of Taiwan. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also expressing support for the Egypt-led plan to reconstruct Gaza. He also rejected the U.S. President Donald Trump's proposal for the U.S. to take over the Strip, saying that removing Gazans from the enclave would not bring about peace.
加沙属于巴勒斯坦人民，也是巴勒斯坦领土不可分割的一部分。任何强制改变加沙地位的行径都不会带来和平，只会引发新的动荡。所以我们支持埃及和阿拉伯国家共同发起的加沙恢复和平计划。人心不可违，公理不可废。
Japanese and British officials have met in the last hour, aiming to draw each other's economies even closer through a new economic 2+2 dialogue to deepen cooperation on trade and defence. The new 2+2 talks, as a platform previously held only with the United States, is now being used to bolster UK-Japan ties. At the dialogue, British Foreign Secretary David Lammy stressed the significance of the UK and Japan having relations, and how the two of the world's largest economies, or rather fourth and sixth of the world's largest economies, are working together to uphold a stable international system and rules-based trade. Mr. Lammy also addressed North Korea's direct involvement in the Ukraine conflict and highlighted Japan's long-standing experience in dealing with Pyongyang's unpredictable actions. Talks also touching on economic security, particularly in tech and clean energy. And more, we're joined by Professor Heng-Yi Kwang from the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo. Thanks for joining us, Professor Heng. You just mentioned the world's fourth and sixth largest economies, that's Japan and the UK. Of course, that's just by some measures. That's an accurate ranking of these two economies. When they are under pressure, directly or indirectly, from the world's number one and number two economies, it makes perfect sense for number four and number six to join forces.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I think you're absolutely right. So Japan is a key member of the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. And Britain is the first European member and also the first non-founding member to join the partnership, enthusiastically supported by Japan. So 2025 is the first full year of UK membership in the CPTPP. And this is seen as a concerted attempt by both the UK and Japan to demonstrate support for free trade and upholding the rules-based trading system.
So UK joining the CPTPP, this was December of last year, as you mentioned, the first non-founding member to join and also the first European country to join, which is essentially an Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific free trade deal. But there are also many firsts in terms of security and defense between Japan and the UK that is happening, not just these 2+2 talks.
Yes, well, Japan signed a reciprocal access agreement with the UK in 2023. And this is the first agreement Japan has signed with a European country, and only the second agreement after Australia. So as you mentioned, there are several firsts in terms of the defense cooperation as well. So in 2016, for example, the Royal Air Force became the first non-US Air Force to train in Japanese airspace. In terms of land exercises, the British Army also has become the first non-US military force to train on Japanese territory as well. And in fact, until last December, Britain was the only European country to hold an annual bilateral ground exercise on Japanese territory. And I might add also that Japan's collaboration with the UK and Italy on the GCAP, Global Combat Aircraft Program, that's also a first in terms of a major defense industrial project that Japan has participated in with a non-US partner. So there are a series of quite significant firsts that Japan has achieved with the UK in terms of defense cooperation.
All right, these talks, plenty of first-time things happening, but they are in fact a progression, a culmination of many changes happening internationally and domestically in the last decade. If you could very succinctly lay out these points so that we can look ahead to see whether this alignment now might actually continue.
Yes, so all these achievements in UK-Japan relationship, do not appear out of nowhere. And in fact, you can trace it back, say, a decade or so in terms of how Japan and Britain have slowly laid the groundwork to where they have come to today. So the alignment between the two countries perhaps was not so tight in, say, 2010s, especially under the David Cameron administration in the UK, which at that point in time was still, quite optimistic about the rise of China, and there was talk about the so-called golden era in terms of UK-China relations. So it was only, I think, after Brexit and the new British Prime Minister came in, Theresa May, and she started thinking a bit more about, maritime security issues, and Britain started thinking more about engaging more with partners in the Indo-Pacific. And these increasingly aligned with then Japanese Prime Minister Abe Shinzo's focus also on maritime security. So around that point in time, I think we started seeing this convergence or alignment in terms of how both countries, think about the strategic environment, security, defense cooperation, and also growing concerns over Chinese assertiveness.
Professor Heng, in a way, the fact that I think we've mentioned in the course of this conversation is the first time we're seeing a dialogue like this for Japan that is outside of the United States, or not with the United States, rather. And this Global Combat Air Program you mentioned is a fighter jet development program involving the UK, Japan, and Italy. This is also the first time that Japan is collaborating on the defense industrial, a large-scale collaboration, again with another country that is not the United States, the first time since the end of the Second World War. This might, given that Donald Trump is concerned with bringing business and trade and manufacture back to the United States, this might excite the US leader to say, might you not think of reallocating your resources, not for GCAP, but towards America? So this is one stumbling block for Japan and the UK continuing on this very close path of close partnership.
Yes, absolutely. So I'd say that Japan and the UK are at a sweet spot in terms of the relationships with one another bilaterally. But as you mentioned, with the GCAP program, well, to be fair, President Trump hasn't said anything explicitly about the GCAP program, although there are some comments coming out from his special envoy to Italy, for example, who suggested that maybe the US might actually want to join GCAP. We never know if this is actually President Trump's thinking on this issue, and there are concerns on the opposite end as well. So I've heard people expressing worries that President Trump might in fact demand Japan buy more US defense kit, right, rather than engaging in this GCAP program. So I think that remains to be seen in terms of the US position on GCAP. So as I said, there are quite a few issues which might raise concerns about this particular sweet spot that we are in at the moment. And also, of course, all these concerns over a Taiwan contingency, what might President Xi Jinping do? And although Japan and the UK are increasingly close defense partners, I think we also need to remember that they are not actually formal allies in the sense that there is no formal security guarantee that Japan and the UK make to one another. So there are also questions about, what Japan and the UK might do in terms of a potential Taiwan contingency as well.
All right, thanks to that, Professor Heng Yi Kwang, was the UK and Japan, perhaps a good example of the coalition of the willing, but not in fact formal treaty allies. Professor Heng there from the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo. Well, the US President Donald Trump, meanwhile, has questioned his country's security alliance with Japan, calling it unequal. His comments come ahead of a US trip by Japanese officials to seek exemptions from Mr. Trump's latest tariffs. He stressed that Tokyo, under the long-standing deal, is not required to protect America. The American leader then suggested that Japan had benefited economically from bilateral ties. An expert quoted by Reuters called the president's remarks technically inaccurate, as Tokyo could help protect the US under certain situations through the exercising of collective self-defense. Japan government spokesperson in response said Tokyo trusts that Washington will keep its obligation. Just last month, Mr. Trump affirmed the US-Japan alliance in a joint statement, which said it is poised to grow stronger than ever. Authorities in North Korea have issued a strong warning against annual military exercises held by the US and South Korea. The North's official news agency KCNA says there will be a horrible price to pay for what it calls foolish and reckless war drills. It adds it will have to take self-defense measures and the toughest threatening action as a sovereign state. KCNA also says the drills will, quote, bring a storm that could lead to circumstances deteriorating in the region. Annual exercises between the US and South Korea, dubbed Freedom Shield, will run for 11 days from Monday. They consist of computer-simulated drills and on-field training. Pyongyang has repeatedly slammed the exercises as a pretext for provocations, seeing them as an infringement of its sovereign rights and interests, saying their conduct could worsen regional security. And staying on the Korean peninsula, protesters in the south are demanding a suspension of military drills in Pocheon. That town was the site of an accidental bombing by 2 fighter jets conducting live fire drills yesterday.
안보란 이유로 포천 시민들의 생명과 안전은 언제든지 침해받을 수 있다는 주장과 다르지가 않다라고 생각합니다. 이제 포천 시민들은 계속 진행되고 있는 이 군사훈련에 대해서 근본적으로 묻지 않을 수 없습니다. 누구를 위한 안보이고 누구를 위한 군사훈련인지에 대해서.
The town's proximity to the border with North Korea carries the added risk of incidents like this one escalating into a military conflict. The Defense Ministry has raised the number of people injured to 29 after 8 air-to-surface bombs were mistakenly dropped on the civilian town. Some of the injured are reporting damage to their hearing, migraines and anxiety. 2 were seriously hurt. Resulting blasts shook homes and buildings. Pocheon lies outside of the training area for jet fighters. South Korea is due to start joint drills with the United States on Monday. Live fire exercises around the accident area have been put on pause pending investigations. Still head on East Asia tonight. The US says talks with Ukraine are back on track as officials from the White House and Kyiv prepare to meet in Saudi Arabia next week. And SpaceX suffers another major setback as one of its Starship rockets explodes mid-flight. A fresh meeting with the US in the pipeline as Ukraine seeks to repair fractured ties. Officials from the White House and Kyiv are set to meet in Saudi Arabia as they work towards a peace deal to end Russia's war in Ukraine. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he will travel to the kingdom on Monday ahead of talks with the U.S., which are scheduled for Tuesday. U.S. envoy Stephen Witkoff says they are looking to secure an initial agreement for a ceasefire. He says President Trump saw a recent letter sent by Mr. Zelensky as a positive first step after the explosive meeting at the White House last week left U.S. support for Ukraine in limbo. Washington has upped the pressure, suspending military aid and intelligence sharing with Kyiv. The White House now says it is reconsidering that pause with ongoing discussions over an agreement for Ukraine's minerals. President Trump says a peace deal is the only option for both Kyiv and Moscow. But President Vladimir Putin from Russia says any peace deal must ensure his country's long-term security. It's unclear if Moscow will join talks in Riyadh. Last month, Kremlin and U.S. officials met in the Saudi capital to discuss improving ties and possible solutions to the Ukraine war. An analyst we spoke to earlier said there are limits to how much European leaders can do in their efforts to help Ukraine.
The Europeans are very clear-eyed about the reality facing them, and I do think that they have been stepping up their efforts, not just in talking the talk, but also walking the walk. But there's only so much they can do, as it is a race against time. The Europeans have a great potential to ramp up their defense production and to boost Ukraine's defense and to actually secure themselves and provide a strong defense and deterrence against potential Russian aggression beyond Ukraine, but they simply lack time to do so quickly enough. Look, the European economies combined are still at least 5 times larger than that of Russia. So Europeans do have the needed capacity to provide for their own defense and for the defense of Ukraine. But the political will is still lacking. The question of the day is, will Europeans be able to go into full mobilization mode, politically, economically, socially, and militarily, to take this issue very seriously and replace the United States as the main security or military aid provider to Ukraine right now? That remains to be seen.
You can also head to website cna.asia for more on the Ukraine war. To also follow the latest via our mobile app. Elon Musk's SpaceX has suffered yet another setback following the explosion of the firm's massive Starship spacecraft minutes after lifting off from Texas.
Gosh, it's like lighting up the...
Social media video showed debris from a failed SpaceX Starship test flight raining down from the skies above the Bahamas Thursday. It marks the second consecutive failure this year for Elon Musk's Mars rocket program. The Starship's flight lasted just minutes after lifting off from facilities at Boca Chica, Texas. A SpaceX live stream of the mission showed it tumbling uncontrollably after multiple engines shut down.
You can see we've lost several engines and we've lost attitude control of the vehicle.
In a statement, SpaceX said the vehicle experienced a rapid, unscheduled disassembly and contact was lost. It wasn't clear if the explosion was caused by SpaceX's automated flight termination system, which triggers when something on the rocket goes wrong.
No way. What is that?
The Federal Aviation Administration briefly issued ground stops at airports in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, and Orlando because of space launch debris. It said it had opened a mishap investigation into the incident. The FAA said that means SpaceX must examine the failure's cause and get the agency's sign-off before Starship can fly again. SpaceX said there were no toxic materials among the debris. A month ago, the company's 7th Starship flight also ended in an explosive failure. The mishaps both happened in early mission phases SpaceX easily surpassed before. The back-to-back incidents mark a setback for a program Musk has sought to speed up this year.
That's East Asia Tonight this Friday. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook and YouTube.